Pops is gone, huh? You're off to some facility starting tomorrow, my son declared coldly, as I sat there, still reeling from the grief of losing my husband. There wasn't even a hint of sorrow on his face for his father's death, just an unpleasant smirk. But don't worry, we'll make sure to properly inherit all of Dad's estate and the house. I was stunned. After not seeing him for so long, this was the first thing out of his mouth. His wife, standing beside him, seemed completely on board with inheriting everything too. They barely visited before, but now they show up just for this. There's no way I'd let them inherit anything. I'm Holly, married for 40 years. My husband and I had always talked about saving for retirement. We'll need about $1.3 million to retire comfortably, he'd say, and I'd agree. We'd worked hard and had some savings, enough that we wouldn't struggle immediately. But the worries never stopped. We do have a son, Kevin, but we haven't seen him in nearly 10 years. Who knows what he's doing now? We'd love to rely on him, but we can't depend on an absent son, especially with potential care needs in the future. Despite our worries, we managed to get by on our own, until one weekday afternoon when the doorbell rang. I thought it was a delivery, but when I checked the monitor, it was Kevin. He looked different from the last time I saw him, rougher, almost unrecognizable. "Hey, it's Kevin," I exclaimed, surprised, as my husband looked just as shocked. "Kevin? Really?" I rushed to open the door, and there he stood with an unfamiliar, flashy woman by his side. Who is this woman? I wondered, my mind racing with questions. Kevin, unfazed, stepped in and called the woman over. "What's going on? What's this all about?" I asked, confused. "Well, I'm getting married to her," Kevin announced casually. After being absent for so long, he dropped one surprise after another, leaving my husband and me speechless. The woman, who introduced herself as Sophie, spoke up. "Nice to meet you, I'm Sophie." Just like that, it seemed they were ready to leave after a brief greeting. "Wait, after so long, can't we talk a bit more?" I asked, not wanting to hold them for long but hoping to chat more with my son and his fiancée. "Please take good care of Kevin," I added, trying to be polite. But Sophie's response was cold and firm. "I'm going to marry Kevin, but I have no intention of becoming part of your family." My husband and I were dumbfounded, unable to say anything as they left. That kind of response only amplified our worries about the future. 6 months have passed since Kevin and Sophie got married, and we haven't seen them once since that initial introduction. We're worried, but as long as our son and his wife are happy, that's all that should matter, or so we tried to tell ourselves. Then Kevin began contacting us occasionally. At first, it should have been a joy to hear from him, but the content of his calls was concerning. "Hey, I'm a bit short on cash. Can you send me $1,000? I'll send you the account details later." It was always about money. He never showed any concern for us, just one-way demands, and it wasn't just once, it was several times a month. We knew this wasn't good. We wanted Kevin to stand on his own, but our concern for our only son made us give in. After discussing it, we complied with his requests. I wish he'd be smarter with his money, I'd say. The early days of marriage are expensive, and we hardly did anything for him when he was young. This is partly our responsibility, my husband would add. For a while, we continued to provide funds to Kevin, but recently he started calling almost daily asking for more money. We realized that if this continued, we wouldn't be able to sustain our own lives. One day, I decided it was time to tell Kevin we couldn't provide any more assistance. When he called, I said, "Kevin, I have something to discuss about money." "What? You're calling to say you'll transfer money?" he asked, sounding disinterested. "No, that's not it. We can't send any more money. We have our own lives to live." "Fine, whatever," he responded, surprisingly calm. I thought we had finally reached an understanding, but my relief was short-lived. Barely an hour after we ended the call, Kevin stormed into our house, furious. "My life is a mess because of you too. It's your fault I dropped out of middle school. It's the parents' responsibility, right? If you can't give me money, then whatever happens is on you." Kevin stood before us, the very image of a delinquent. It's true that my husband and I were too busy with work when he was young and didn't spend enough time with him. Now, seeing him like this, I feared what might happen if we didn't help him. His angry gaze left me with little choice but to comply. "All right, how much do you need?" I asked hesitantly. "That's up to you," Kevin replied, his tone cold. It pained me to realize just how much our son resented us. For the time being, I handed him the $100 I had in my wallet. $100? You're joking, right? He scoffed. "No, this is really all I can do," I said, showing him my bank statement. It was the account we used for living expenses, not the one for savings, so it didn't have much in it. Moreover, it was just before my pension was due, so there was hardly anything left. Is that so? Kevin muttered as he pocketed the $100 and left without another word. After that incident, perhaps realizing he couldn't expect any more money from us, the calls from Kevin demanding money stopped. I thought we could finally live a peaceful retirement, until my husband was diagnosed with colorectal cancer shortly afterward. The doctor said that even with treatment, recovery wasn't expected, and only hospice care could be provided. I wanted him to live as long as possible, but he didn't feel the same. I've had enough, he said, his voice weary. If there's no hope of recovery, don't waste money. Think of your future and save what we have. Persuaded by my husband's wishes, I reluctantly agreed. I decided to let him spend his final days as he wished. A month later, he passed away peacefully. You did well. This is for the best, I reassured myself, though losing my beloved husband left me in deep sorrow. The only comfort I had was knowing he spent his last moments without pain. Preparations for the funeral began immediately, but my role was minimal, just contacting people from a list my husband had prepared before his passing. The list included old friends, colleagues, and our son Kevin. When I informed Kevin of his father's death, his response was indifferent. How cold-hearted, I thought, letting out a sigh. On the day of the funeral, the service went smoothly and many came to offer their condolences, but there was no sign of my son or his wife. I hadn't expected them to show up, but as I was greeting mourners, I saw Kevin and Sophie arrive, just casually in what looked like loungewear. Unbelievable. I tried to ignore them, but they approached me. So, the old man finally kicked the bucket, huh? You should just go into a care home starting tomorrow, were the first words out of Kevin's mouth. My anger surged at his smirking face and the callous suggestion. Just as I was about to retort, Sophie chimed in. Don't worry, we'll properly inherit the estate and the house. What on earth were they thinking? There's no inheritance for you to receive, I replied, struggling to keep my voice steady. They had barely been in our lives, yet here they were, acting as if they had a right to everything. I wanted to lash out, but I couldn't bring myself to do it at my husband's funeral. We'll talk later. For now, just offer your incense, I said quietly, trying to suppress the trembling in my voice. Then, I heard a familiar voice. Same as always, said Mr. Smith, an old friend of my husband's and, as it turned out, a lawyer. He might know something about this inheritance issue. When I briefly explained the situation to him, he assured me he would help me disinherit Kevin. After the ceremony ended and the mourners had left, only Mr. Smith, my son, his wife, and I remained at the funeral parlor. Did Dad leave a $2 million inheritance? Give it to us, quickly, Kevin demanded, smirking as usual while Sophie looked on expectantly. They must have thought they were entitled to everything, but I had no intention of giving them a cent. I'll make this clear. You won't be getting any inheritance, I stated firmly. Kevin, stunned by my words, reacted with anger. What? You've got to be joking. That's impossible. You can't do that. You think it's not allowed, I replied calmly. Why don't we confirm with Mr. Smith here? I've already left the inheritance matters in his hands, so it's out of mine. Kevin scoffed dismissively. What are you even saying? I don't care about some irrelevant old man. His vulgar language made me feel a deep shame, regretting that I had raised a son who would argue about inheritance at his father's funeral. Disgusted by his attitude, I turned to Mr. Smith and asked, please explain the situation. Of course, Mr. Smith began. Kevin, do you remember me? I don't know you. Who the hell are you? Kevin snapped, his tone aggressive. Mr. Smith remained calm and undisturbed. That's a shame. We used to play together when you were little. Kevin, uninterested in past memories, demanded, so what? You're here to talk about Dad's estate, right? I'm the one who'll inherit it. When Kevin returned to the topic of inheritance, Mr. Smith's expression sharpened. Kevin, you have no right to inherit. What? What nonsense are you spouting? Kevin shot back. Remember your delinquent behavior as a teenager that involved the police, Mr. Smith continued. And as an adult, you accumulated significant debt without your mother's knowledge, which your father had to repay. I know everything. I had just learned these details from Mr. Smith, aware of Kevin's past misdeeds, but completely blindsided by the massive debt he had created, which my husband had quietly covered. So what? Kevin spat. It's a parent's duty to take care of their child. Besides, there's no doubt I'm his son, so naturally, I have a right to the inheritance. Kevin moved toward Mr. Smith in a rage, with Sophie equally furious by his side. It's impossible that Kevin doesn't have any inheritance rights. Everyone knows a person's own child would have rights. Are you a real lawyer, or is that just a lie? She demanded. Their loud arguments drew the attention of the funeral parlor's security guards, who rushed over in a panic. Is there a problem here? One of the guards asked, trying to calm them down as he approached me for details. I felt embarrassed to have others involved in this family conflict. I'm sorry, it's just a family dispute. I apologized sincerely to the guard. We truly didn't mean to cause any trouble. While I bowed my head in apology, Kevin and Sophie continued to struggle. Let go. What do you think you're doing? Ouch, that hurts. Stop it, old man, they shouted, their disrespectful behavior finally pushing me to the brink. Enough, I snapped. Your attire and behavior are completely inappropriate for a funeral. You're causing a scene and disturbing everyone around you. Knock it off. I was aware my voice was getting louder, and the couple, who hadn't expected me to get this angry, suddenly quieted down. Mr. Smith leaned in and whispered to me, Don't worry, there's no way Kevin will inherit. Your father prepared a contingency plan. A contingency plan, I repeated, unsure of what he meant. But Mr. Smith continued, It's time to confront Kevin with the hardship he's caused you. He patted my back reassuringly. I couldn't indulge my son's selfishness any longer and approached them calmly. Enough already, I said firmly. That's my line, Kevin retorted. All this could end if you just agree to let me inherit. I've told you countless times, it's impossible for you to inherit, I replied, moving closer with each step. Kevin's face turned pale as he noticed my approach. You come to your father's funeral with a disrespectful attitude after causing trouble for others your entire life. You truly have no respect for your parents, I said coldly, glaring at him. No, but that's because of you too. You were never home when I was a kid, Kevin protested, always quick to make excuses when cornered. Yes, we weren't home, and I regret that, I admitted. But many kids grow up in similar situations and don't spend their lives blaming their parents. It's pathetic to rely on your parents even as an adult. Kevin trembled silently, his head bowed. Whether from anger or sorrow, I couldn't tell, but I knew he was listening. It was time to resolve this once and for all. Mr. Smith, please use the last resort you mentioned earlier. I had no idea what this last resort entailed, but it seemed like the only way to break through the current situation. In response, Mr. Smith handed me an envelope. Inside was a document titled Final Judgment Certificate of Inheritance. What's this? I asked, perplexed by the contents. I stared at the document in my hands, confused. What does this mean? I asked, both Kevin and Sophie looking on with curiosity. Kevin, cornered and defiant, shifted uneasily. Mr. Smith began to explain quietly, During his lifetime, your father filed a court petition stating that he did not want Kevin to inherit any of his estate. This document proves that his petition was accepted. Kevin and Sophie were clearly shaken by this revelation, and I was struggling to grasp the situation. When did this happen? I asked, bewildered. Your father asked me to keep it a secret from you, Mr. Smith continued. Now that he has passed away, I believed it was the right time to present this document to you. What does this mean? Kevin demanded, his voice tinged with frustration. Are you saying my father decided to cut me out of the inheritance? Why would he do that? Can this just be ignored? Mr. Smith explained further, Normally, a husband's estate would be inherited by his spouse and children. However, under certain circumstances, one can apply to disinherit a specific person. This is known as disinheritance. So you're telling me my father took this step to exclude me? Kevin's anger was palpable. Is there any way this can be ignored? I had never heard of such a measure before. The reality that my husband had gone to great lengths to ensure Kevin wouldn't inherit was sinking in. Mr. Smith added, Unfortunately, it cannot be ignored. It has been legally recognized by the court and the procedure is legally valid. Additionally, considering the significant debt Kevin has caused your father over the years, it's understandable why he would want to avoid leaving an inheritance. I had not been aware of the extent of Kevin's debt. How much debt did my son leave for my husband to cover? It was $40,000, Mr. Smith replied. Your husband was prepared to handle it himself rather than have Kevin demand money from him every month. There was an agreement that Kevin would repay it, but he broke that promise, which left your husband very angry. I was shocked by this revelation and turned to Kevin, who remained silent. His silence spoke volumes. If you're going to be silent, then fine. Just leave, I said, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and despair. I never want to see either of you again, I said firmly. You understand that you won't be inheriting anything. Kevin's defiant attitude persisted. But surely there's something. My patience snapped. Leave, you ungrateful son. Our ties are severed. Never come to see me again. Startled by my outburst, Kevin and Sophie quickly exited the room. I saw Kevin stumble in his haste and fall to the floor. Mr. Smith, thank you. I don't know what I would have done without your help, I said, my voice filled with gratitude. It was your husband's last wish, Mr. Smith replied. Now you can find peace knowing his wishes were honored. Thanks to Mr. Smith's support, I was able to protect my late husband's inheritance. Without his assistance, I might have been forced into a difficult situation, vulnerable to Kevin and Sophie's demands. Kevin had never changed, and I no longer considered him my son. He and his wife could fend for themselves. I planned to ensure they received nothing from me. With these thoughts, I left the funeral. A week later, while sorting through my husband's belongings, the phone rang. Hello, is this Miss Holly? The voice on the other end was from the police. Yes, it is. How can I help you? We have a son named Kevin, correct? We found 2 children living in a flat under his name, and they've been taken into protective custody. I was stunned. What's the situation? Are these children my sons? The officer continued. We're also searching for Kevin but haven't located him yet. Could you please come to the station? I'll be right there, I replied, feeling a mix of dread and curiosity. Upon arriving at the station, I immediately recognized the children. They were about 2 years old and bore a striking resemblance to Kevin when he was young. No birth certificates had been filed, likely due to financial troubles. The landlord had reported them after discovering debt collection letters scattered near the children. They had probably been abandoned during a desperate escape. It was heartbreaking to see such young children in this situation. Would you consider placing them in a care facility? The officer asked. No, I'll take them in, I responded immediately. Since then, I've faced the challenges of childcare, but my days have been fulfilling with the children. Years have passed since I took them in, and there's been no word from Kevin and his wife. I tell the children that their father might be gone or somewhere else, but they won't see him again. The abandonment must have left a deep wound in their hearts, but I am committed to supporting and caring for them as they grow.